had nothing left. No job. No home. Just $1. And a book that was about to save my life. They say it gets darkest right before the dawn. But whoever said that never spent the night in a rusted-out '94 Toyota Corolla with a busted heater and half a tank of nothing. That night, the darkness didn't feel poetic. It felt like the end. The kind that doesn't come with sunrise. I had 27 cents in change rattling in the cup holder and a single crumpled dollar bill tucked behind my driver's license. $1. It was January, somewhere outside of Tulsa. I'd been driving west without a plan, chasing the idea that maybe life was better where I wasn't. My phone was dead. Not just battery dead, canceled, shut off, deactivated. No calls, no texts, no nothing. Just me and the silence that came with failure. And failure? Oh, I knew her by name. 2 months earlier I had a job, a girlfriend, an apartment with walls that didn't smell like mildew. Then came the layoffs. Then came the fights. Then came the eviction notice. One domino tipped, and the whole line collapsed. I never thought I'd end up like this. Nobody does, I guess. I spent that night talking to the roof of my car like it was an old friend. You ever wonder if maybe we peaked in high school? I said, voice cracking from cold and shame. The roof didn't answer, but I liked to think it was listening. When the morning came, there was frost on the windshield. I scraped it with a gas station rewards card that didn't reward me with jack. I sat there for a while, watching my own breath curl into ghosts, and that's when I pulled the dollar out. I held it like it weighed something, like it had a soul. And maybe it did, because I swear to you that moment felt like something sacred. A test. Like the universe was watching, waiting to see what I'd do with my last little piece of hope. Now, normally I would have spent it on coffee, or a scratch-off ticket just to feel like luck still knew my name. But this time, I don't know what got into me. Maybe it was the cold. Maybe it was madness. Maybe it was fate whispering in my ear. I walked into a corner bookstore that I'd passed a dozen times but never entered. A tiny place with dusty windows and a bell on the door that jingled like it was happy to see me. Inside, it smelled like ink and leather and the kind of stories that are too old to remember their authors. Behind the counter sat a woman. Late 20s maybe. Auburn hair pulled up in a messy twist, glasses sliding down her nose, and a sweater that looked like it had seen better decades. She looked up from her book and smiled. Like I wasn't just another stray off the highway. Like I belonged there. Cold out there, she said. Yeah, I replied, trying not to shiver. Thought I'd warm up by browsing. She nodded, unfazed by my beat-up sneakers and the sleep creases on my face. I wandered the aisles, no real destination, just trying to make sense of why I came in. That's when I saw it. This old, dog-eared book on a clearance cart. 10 cents to change your life. It was a joke, obviously. Some self-help relic from the 80s, bright yellow with cartoon lightning bolts on the cover. But something about it made me stop. I picked it up, flipped through the pages, and there it was, written in blue ink on the inside cover. If you're holding this, it means you're not done yet. Goosebumps. I swear. Real ones. I took it to the counter. She looked at it, then looked at me. You sure about this one? It's $1, right? She smiled, slow and a little curious. Yeah, but no one's ever actually bought it before. Well, I said, unfolding that last dollar from my wallet. Guess I'm not just anyone. The bell above the door jingled again as I left. That old book pressed to my chest like it might vanish if I loosened my grip. The cold air bit through my jacket, but something in me was warmer than before. Not hot, not blazing, just a flicker. A pilot light. I slid back into the Corolla and opened the book right there in the parking lot. The pages smelled like attic dust and forgotten dreams. The first chapter was titled, You Are Not a Mistake. I almost laughed out loud. Felt like the book had a sense of humor. Either that or it was reading my damn mind. I read for maybe an hour. Didn't even notice my fingers turning red from the cold. It was cheesy stuff, sure, but honest. Like the author wasn't trying to fix me, just remind me I was fixable. Eventually, my stomach growled loud enough to shame me into action. I drove around until I found a food bank handing out bagged lunches. I got one without anyone asking too many questions, and sat in the car, chewing on a sandwich that tasted like charity and mustard. Then something strange happened. I heard a knock on the window. It was her, the girl from the bookstore. She had a to-go coffee cup in one hand and a scarf wrapped around her neck like she'd lost the war with the wind. You forgot your change, she said, holding out 3 quarters. I didn't expect any, I said, rolling down the window just enough to not let all the heat out. You still get it, she replied, gently tossing the coins onto the passenger seat. Also, that book is weirdly good. Gets under your skin. Yeah, I said, watching her breath fog in front of her lips. It's like it knows I'm falling apart and wants to hold the pieces. She tilted her head at me, curious. You from around here? I thought about lying, saying I had a job waiting somewhere, that I was just passing through. But something about her made the truth easier. Not really from anywhere anymore. She nodded slowly. Well, if you're gonna be a ghost, might as well haunt the right places. We've got a back room at the shop. Space heater, couch, Wi-Fi if the signal's feeling generous. I blinked. Are you offering? Not officially, she said quickly, brushing a stray hair out of her face. Just saying, if a guy needed somewhere to not freeze, it might be good karma to look the other way. Her name was Emily, I'd learn that later. But right then, she was just the first person in weeks who'd seen me. Not the broke clothes, not the dead eyes, but me. And that was like being handed air when you're drowning. That night, I parked the Corolla behind the bookstore and crept in through the back. She was already there, making tea and humming some tune I didn't know but instantly liked. The couch was worn but soft, with a throw blanket that smelled faintly of cinnamon and cats. I sank into it like I was home, like the universe had left the porch light on for me after all. Emily handed me a mug, then sat on the floor, cross-legged, book in her lap. We didn't talk much, just shared space. Quiet, comfortable space. After a while, she asked, So, what's your story? And I didn't give her the whole thing. Not yet. Just pieces. Had a life. Lost it. Trying to figure out if there's a reset button somewhere. She nodded. Well, you found the right book for that. I thought it was a joke. Most things that change you start that way. The wind howled outside like it was angry at being shut out, but inside that room, the world was softer, warmer. And for the first time in months, I didn't fall asleep afraid. I woke up to the smell of coffee and the low creak of pages turning. For a split second, I thought it had all been a dream, the bookstore, the couch, Emily. But there she was, perched on a stool with her legs tucked under her, sipping coffee like it was a ritual and watching the morning light smear across the wooden floor. You snore, she said, not looking up from her book. Didn't know I was still capable of sleeping that deep? I mumbled, stretching out my back until it popped in 6 different places. She smiled behind her mug. That couch has healing powers. That day turned into 3, then 4. I started helping around the shop, stocking shelves, fixing the wobbly step out front, sweeping floors. It wasn't much, but it felt like something. Like maybe I hadn't entirely dissolved into uselessness. The town was small, the kind where everyone pretends not to gossip but knows each other's business down to the brand of toothpaste. Emily told folks I was her cousin from Ohio. No one questioned it too hard. In the evenings, we'd sit behind the counter reading or talking, usually about nothing, music, food, dumb dreams from the night before. But sometimes she'd surprise me. You ever think you were meant for more? She asked one night as we closed up shop. I looked up from a half-broken lamp I was trying to rewire. Like what? Fortune and fame? She shook her head. No. Just more. Meaning. A spark. I thought about that. Thought about how my life had burned out like a cheap candle. Quick, messy, and unceremonious. I used to think that. Then life kicked it out of me. You shouldn't let it, she said, almost too soft to hear. That night, after she went upstairs to her little attic apartment, I stayed behind with the book. 10 cents to change your life. I kept reading. It wasn't about miracles or luck. It was about showing up when you didn't want to. About forgiving yourself when you'd rather disappear. About letting go of the version of you that didn't make it. There was a line that hit me so hard I had to read it twice. Despair is just a story you keep telling yourself. Change the story, and you change the ending. I don't know why, but I started writing in the margins. My thoughts, my anger, my stupid hopes I didn't want to admit I still had. The book became something living. A conversation I wasn't brave enough to have out loud. And Emily? She kept showing up. She made the silence between us feel like music. One night, we were watching the rain streak down the front window when she said, You have kind eyes. I blinked. You've seen me barely showered, unemployed, and eating cereal straight from the box. She smiled. Still, kind eyes. I wanted to kiss her, not out of lust or loneliness, but out of something else, something scarier. Hope, that traitor. Instead, I just said, "You're weird. Takes one to know one," she shot back. But that moment, yeah, it hung in the air like a chord not quite finished. We were both afraid to play the next note. It had been 2 weeks, 14 days since I walked into that bookstore with $1 and a frozen soul. It's wild how quickly nothing can turn into everything. A room with heat, a couch with a blanket, a woman who looked at me like I wasn't a broken broadcast. And just when I started to think maybe the storm had passed, I saw the first cloud roll back in. It started with a phone. Not mine. Mine was still dead to the world, but one left on the front counter while Emily made tea in the back. It lit up with a message that read, "You okay? You've been quiet since he showed up." Nate, I wasn't trying to pry, but I also wasn't blind. When she came back, I must have looked like I swallowed glass. She noticed immediately. "What?" I shook my head. "Nothing." She tilted her head. That look people get when they know exactly what nothing really means. "You saw the message." I nodded slowly. She sighed, then walked around the counter and sat beside me. "He's just a friend. Kind of an ex, kind of not. It's complicated." I gave a small laugh. "Isn't it always?" She didn't say anything right away, just looked at her hands like they might give her the words. "I used to let people in too fast," she finally said. "Then I stopped letting them in at all. You confused me. You don't want anything from me. Most people do." "I don't want anything," I said honestly. "Not unless you want to give it." She looked at me then, really looked, like she was trying to decide if I was real, or just another hurt wearing a smile. "Don't make me regret letting you stay." "I won't," I said. "But I can't promise I won't want more than you can give." She nodded.
No smile. No answers.
Just the truth of two people unsure of what to do with each other. The next few days were quieter. Still warm, but quieter. Like we were both listening for cracks in the foundation. That's when Chris showed up. He was the guy who used to own the bookstore before Emily took it over. Mid-30s, confident in a way that always made me feel like I was standing in his shadow. He rolled in with a leather jacket and a voice like gravel soaked in bourbon. "Emily," he grinned, leaning on the counter like he still belonged there. "Heard you had a new guest." She glanced at me nervously. "Chris, this is..." "Yeah, I heard. The guy who wandered in with $1 and stuck around like a stray dog." I stiffened. He smiled like he meant it as a joke. But that kind of smile always comes with teeth. Emily looked pissed. "Don't be an ass." I stepped forward. "It's cool. He's not wrong. I am a stray." Chris looked me up and down. "Well, hope you've got more than coffee shop charm if you're planning to stick around. This town eats people who drift." He left not long after, but the air stayed tense for hours. Emily barely spoke, just shelved books with a little too much force. Finally, I asked, "You want me gone?" She turned slowly.
No.
"I want you to fight for staying." That night, I didn't sleep much. I reread the chapter in the book called "The Limit Isn't the End." It talked about how every person has a tipping point, the moment right before they give up or break through. The last test. I stared at that line for a long time. Your life won't change when you finally make it. It changes the second you decide you won't die like this. I knew right then I couldn't just be a couch ghost anymore. The next morning I asked Emily for a real job. "Whatever you can give me," I said. "I'll clean, I'll fix things, I'll run errands. I want to earn being here." She looked at me for a long time, then handed me a key. "You already did." The key wasn't much. A little silver piece of metal on a string. But when she dropped it into my hand, it felt heavier than anything I'd ever carried. Heavier than shame, heavier than debt, heavier than the past. It meant trust. It meant maybe, after that, things changed between us. Quietly, like the slow unfurling of spring. We started having breakfast together, sitting on milk crates behind the store, sipping coffee from mismatched mugs. She liked hers with too much sugar. I drank mine black because I couldn't afford habits when I was broke. Now I just preferred the honesty of it. She laughed more. I caught myself watching the way her nose crinkled when she did. One morning, she played an old Fleetwood Mac record in the shop before opening and danced around with a duster like she was floating. I sat on the floor between bookshelves and watched her like I was witnessing something sacred. And somewhere in the middle of all that stillness and mess, I fell in love with her. Not the lightning bolt kind. Not the movie screen violinswell kind. No, this was something softer, more dangerous, the kind of love that builds slowly, until one day you realize it's everywhere. In the way she says your name. In the way she leaves the lamp on for you when she goes upstairs. In the way her hand brushed yours, lingered, and didn't apologize. But love, real love, doesn't come without a mirror. And she was starting to see mine. You ever gonna tell me your real story? She asked one night, sitting beside me in the glow of the front window. I didn't answer right away. I was holding that book again. My dollar book, now dog-eared and scribbled full of my thoughts. It was starting to feel more like a journal than a guide. And maybe that's what it was all along. I finally said, I had a brother, 2 years older. He was the one everyone bet on. Straight A student. Got into Duke. I followed him around like a shadow. She listened, silent. When he died, car accident. I stopped knowing who I was without him. I dropped out of college, blew through my savings, pissed off my family, lost my job. By the time I realized I needed help, it felt like the world had already moved on. And I just didn't know how to catch up. She reached for my hand and didn't let go. I'm sorry, she said. I nodded. Me too. Then she kissed me. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was the kind of kiss that says, I see you, and you're still worth it. I hadn't felt that in a long, long time. We didn't speak much after that. Just held onto each other like the world might try and take it all back in the morning. But love doesn't exist in a vacuum. It stirs the dust. And that dust? It doesn't always settle how you want it to. A few days later, Chris came back. Not alone this time. He brought a man with a clipboard. A guy from the city. They walked the perimeter of the building, pointed at cracks in the brick, made notes like they were planning something. Emily confronted him right in the middle of the store. What are you doing? Chris crossed his arms. Just making sure my old place doesn't fall down. This isn't your place anymore. He shrugged. Technically, I still hold the lease on the property. You're month to month. And the guy I'm working with? He's looking to turn this block into something bigger, cleaner, less falling apart. You're trying to sell it. Chris didn't deny it. My fists curled without thinking. I wanted to hit something, break something, but that wouldn't fix anything. That night, Emily was quiet again. Real quiet. She sat beside me on the couch, curled into herself like she was trying not to take up space. What if we lose the shop? She asked, barely above a whisper. I didn't have an answer, but I had a promise. Then we build something new. She looked up at me, eyes glassy. You'd stay? I already did. The next week moved like the seconds before a crash. Slow, loud, and out of your control. Chris filed the paperwork. The man with the clipboard came back, this time with a crew. They measured walls, tested beams, ran numbers. Emily tried not to show it, but I could see it breaking her from the inside out. Every time they stepped in the store, it was like they were cutting through her heart with measuring tape. They're gonna gut it, she said one night, her head resting on my chest. Turn it into a juice bar or some overpriced dog boutique. I hate kale, I replied, and she laughed, soft but real. We came up with plans. Sell what we could. Start a pop-up shop. Hit the road with books in the back of the Corolla. A mobile bookstore. A moving dream. But dreams need fuel. And money. And more belief than we had left in the tank. I kept going back to that book. 10 cents to change your life. The pages were swollen now, warped with coffee stains and my scribbled ramblings. It didn't have any answers about gentrification or real estate, but it had something else. Courage. One line near the end. If you want to be more, you have to stop acting like you're nothing. So I did something I never thought I would. I sold the car. Wasn't worth much, but it got me a few $100 and enough nervous energy to walk into a bank and ask about small business grants. Then I started talking. To anyone who'd listen. I told them about the bookstore, about Emily, about the kind of place that didn't just sell books, it saved people. Me included. People donated. They actually donated. Not everyone. Not much. But enough to make the city raise an eyebrow. Enough to stall the deal. Enough to turn the story into something the local paper ran a headline about. Last dollar, first chapter. A bookstore fights back. Chris came into the store with the paper in his hand and a storm in his face. You really think this place is worth saving? He asked me. I looked him in the eye. It saved me. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he dropped the paper on the counter and walked out. Never came back. 2 weeks later, we signed a new lease. Emily cried when the papers were official. Not the dramatic movie cry. The quiet, shoulder-shaking kind you only do when the thing you didn't believe in actually happened. That night, we sat in the back room again. The old couch under us. The store dark except for the lamp and the moonlight. I held her hand. She held my heart. You really stayed, she whispered. I kissed the top of her head. You really saved me. She reached over and pulled the book from my bag, The $1 Miracle. The cover was torn now. The spine bent. But inside, beneath all my scribbles and thoughts and late-night unravelings, she wrote something new on the last page. You didn't buy a book. You bought a beginning. We framed that page. It hangs above the register now. People still come in asking about it. About him. The guy with the last dollar. And every time they do, I tell the story. Not because it's some fairy tale, but because it's true. I tell them I walked into a bookstore looking for shelter and found a woman with a second-hand smile who saw something left in me. I tell them about a book that promised change for 10 cents but gave me a new life for $1. I tell them love doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it shows up with glasses slipping off her nose and a sarcastic mouth. And I tell them this: you don't have to be fixed to be worth loving. You don't have to have everything to begin again. Sometimes all it takes is deciding not to die like this.